Have you ever witnessed a moment so intense it made your heart race in an instant? Picture a quiet sidewalk, a fearless German shepherd, and an arrogant biker who doesn't realize he's provoking more than just a friendly pet. He's messing with a retired canine dog. This electrifying confrontation, where a simple joke nearly spirals out of control, sets the stage for an unforgettable story of courage and community. You won't believe how the tension builds, who steps in to help, and what surprising twists unfold. If you're curious about how a single reckless kick leads to a chain of dramatic events and how honor and loyalty shine through, then you absolutely have to follow this story to the end. Don't miss out on the emotional roller coaster that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Before we continue, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales that spark conversations, inspire empathy, and celebrate the power of unity. Sit back, hit that subscribe button, and get ready for a thrilling journey you won't soon forget. Brad and his two companions claimed a spot near the entrance of Gwen's Coffee Haven, their boots thudding against the concrete. The noise of their arrival lingered like a faint echo of thunder on a clear day. One of them revved his motorcycle engine again, eliciting an impatient glance from a couple of patrons inside the cafe. With an air of casual dominance, Brad leaned against a small outdoor table, scanning the scene before him. There was a subtle dare in his gaze, as if he enjoyed the discomfort he stirred in strangers. Tony and Dex flanked him, both men wearing matching patches on their leather jackets that hinted at membership in a tight-knit biker club. Anthony, for his part, tried not to jump to conclusions. Green Hill was generally peaceful, and plenty of folks rode motorcycles without causing a stir. Yet this trio's mannerisms radiated more than just casual swagger. There was an undercurrent of aggression, palpable enough that Titan remained on high alert. The German shepherd's ears twitched, and Anthony could feel tension rippling through the leash. Experience had taught Anthony to trust Titan's instincts. If Titan was uneasy, there was usually a reason. Brad seemed to notice Titan fairly quickly. "Hey," he called out, voice resonating in the otherwise hushed space. "Look at the size of that dog." His words weren't necessarily threatening on the surface, but the edge in his tone was unmistakable. Tony and Dex exchanged glances before letting out low chuckles. Titan fixed his gaze on Brad, his stance firm. The dog neither barked nor moved, but the aura of readiness around him was plain to see for anyone paying attention. While Anthony could not see the bikers, he felt a shift in the cafe's atmosphere. Small noises, the scrape of chairs, the clink of spoons against ceramic mugs, ceased as patrons turned their attention toward this developing scene. Anthony reached down, giving Titan a gentle pat on his shoulder to indicate calm. Yet a subtle knot of worry formed in Anthony's stomach. Titan rarely became so fixed on a single individual unless there was cause. "Nice dog you got there," Brad said, taking a step closer. His voice carried the same mocking lilt that a cat might use before toying with a trapped mouse. "Is he as smart as he looks, or just a big teddy bear?" Some in the crowd tittered nervously at Brad's sarcastic question. Tony and Dex smirked, crossing their arms as though waiting for their leader to escalate the situation further. Anthony lifted his head, forcing a polite but composed tone. "He's very smart," he replied, "and he's my guide. Please don't startle him." While Anthony tried to maintain calm, Titan's tension told him that these men might not have any intention of backing down. A thick silence settled, as though the entire sidewalk was caught in a collective breath. Even the baristas inside seemed hesitant to go about their usual bustling tasks. Brad let out a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, I see," he said. "You're blind, aren't you?" Though it was posed as a question, there was an unmistakable sneer in his voice. Titan let out a low grumble that only Anthony could likely interpret as a warning. The dog's training dictated he remain calm, but that didn't mean he was oblivious to threatening behavior. Anthony felt his chest constrict with a mix of apprehension and anger. He had hoped this was merely a tense moment that would pass, but the look on Brad's face and Titan's unwavering focus suggested otherwise. Anthony Hughes began his morning much like he always did, sitting quietly at a little outdoor table in front of Gwen's Coffee Haven. The early breeze of Green Hill gave the day a crisp, cool feel, and the sky above used a perfect cloudless stretch of gentle blue. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee floated around, mingling with the subtle scent of blooming flowers from a planter near the entrance. Laughter and light chatter drifted in the background, a tapestry of pleasant morning sounds. Yet despite the hum of conversation, Anthony sat in a calm cocoon of quietude. He was a middle-aged man, his temples peppered with gray, and he wore dark sunglasses that signaled his visual impairment. Though he could not see the sunrise brightening the town, he sensed the shift in temperature and felt the warmth on his face as the sun rose higher. By his side, resting patiently, was Titan, his loyal German shepherd. Titan was no ordinary guide dog. His posture and bearing hinted at a life that had once been devoted to law enforcement duties. Indeed, the dog had served as part of a canine unit, a detail Anthony had learned only in broad strokes but respected deeply. Even at rest, Titan exuded a quiet vigilance that revealed his meticulous training. Anthony's routine at Gwen's Coffee Haven had been a comforting constant ever since he moved to Greenhill. Every morning he would settle into his usual seat, order a small cappuccino, and allow himself to enjoy the gentle hum of the world waking up. This daily ritual provided a sense of normalcy and independence, two elements Anthony treasured immensely. He appreciated how the baristas recognized his voice and how the regulars greeted him with warm smiles, though he couldn't see them. There was solace in familiarity, in the consistent kindness extended by strangers who gradually became acquaintances. That morning, as Anthony lifted his cup to take a sip, Titan suddenly stirred at his feet. The dog lifted his head, ears perked, alert to something in the distance. Anthony paused, one hand gently resting on Titan's back, feeling the dog's muscles tense. His instincts told him that Titan's reaction was not a random shift. Something had captured the dog's attention. A moment later, the roar of three motorcycles cut through the serene atmosphere, a jarring contrast to the muted morning bustle. All around, heads turned in unison as the motorcycles pulled into a parking space near the cafe. Their engines snarled, drowning out the subdued murmur of conversation. Three riders dismounted, each clad in a leather jacket adorned with bold patches. Their presence radiated a certain tension, like a gust of wind that disrupts an otherwise still clearing. Though Anthony couldn't see their approach, he detected the sudden hush of the crowd. One of the bikers, a tall man with broad shoulders and an air of authority, let out a confident laugh. His name, though unknown to Anthony at the time, was Brad. He locked his helmet under his arm and surveyed the surroundings. His two companions, Tony and Dex, followed closely, their eyes scanning the tables and the patrons. Titan shifted again, pressing slightly against Anthony's leg as if to silently alert him that someone, deserved attention. Anthony reached down to reassure his companion with a light pat. There was no fear on Anthony's part, but he couldn't ignore the sudden change in the cafe's ambiance. Something in Titan's posture spoke volumes. Whatever was brewing, the peace that usually accompanied Anthony's morning ritual began to unravel the moment Brad and his friends arrived. Brad took another step toward Anthony's table, as if testing the German shepherd's resolve. Titan didn't lunge, nor did he bark. He merely shifted his weight, muscles tight beneath his sleek fur. Anyone with experience around dogs would recognize the stance as a clear message. Proceed with caution. Tony and Dex hovered behind Brad like shadows, exchanging uneasy grins. They clearly supported his alpha-like posturing but seemed a bit nervous themselves. Several patrons looked ready to intervene or call the authorities, but the unspoken hope was that the situation might resolve itself before it spiraled out of control. A waitress inside the cafe had already pulled out her phone, discreetly filming through the window, just in case. Anthony could sense the hush that had fallen over the outdoor seating area. Swallowing a lump in his throat, he fought to maintain a composed tone. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said. "Titan here is just doing his job." His hand hovered over Titan's back, reassuring the dog, but also reassuring himself. The last thing Anthony wanted was a confrontation, especially given how reliant he was on Titan's guidance. In a worst-case scenario, Titan's protective instincts could escalate the tension further, something Anthony earnestly wished to avoid. "His job?" Brad echoed, his sneer widening. "What, to babysit you?" Tony and Dex snickered at the barb, though they cast wary glances at Titan. The German shepherd's gaze never wavered, and there was a deliberate stillness to his body that betrayed long hours of disciplined training. A few feet away, a woman with a stroller cleared her throat, mustering the courage to speak up. Hey, leave them alone, she said, voice quavering with nerves. He has every right to be here with his service dog. Brad paused for a moment, glancing at her with a raised eyebrow. The faintest flicker of uncertainty crossed his face, as if he were momentarily surprised someone had intervened. Then he let out a bark of laughter, dismissing her concern. Look, lady, Brad said, I'm not doing anything. Just curious about this big mutt. His gaze flicked back to Anthony. Are you sure he's up for it? I've known some big dogs that crumble the second you raise a hand at him. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air like a rancid odor. Titan issued a low, rumbling growl, barely audible yet unmistakable. Anthony's grip on the leash tightened. The tension ratcheted up another notch, and the air felt charged with the possibility of violence. A few bystanders began whispering among themselves, wondering if they should call the police. Anthony took a steadying breath. I'd appreciate it if you kept your distance, he said, lifting his chin. His tone was firm, though a tremor of anxiety wove through his words. Titan had never failed him before, but Anthony was keenly aware of how quickly an encounter like this could devolve. Brad smirked, evidently enjoying the power he held over the situation. Just keep him on a short leash, pal, he said, taking another half step forward. Titan tensed, but still did not spring. A knot twisted in Anthony's stomach. He didn't want Titan to interpret this as an order to attack, but the dog was dangerously close to perceiving Brad's approach as a direct threat. In the background, someone muttered, "This is getting out of hand," while another whispered, "Where's the manager?" Yet no one fully stepped in. The cafe's usual sense of comfort and safety had been replaced by a suffocating anxiety that gripped every onlooker. From the corner of his eye, what little vision he had left, Anthony thought he saw the figure of another man quietly exiting the scene, possibly to find help. But time felt as though it had slowed, each second weighed down by fear of what might happen next. The tension reached a near breaking point when Brad suddenly lifted a foot and nudged a nearby chair. The metal scraped loudly against the concrete, producing a sharp squeal that set Anthony's teeth on edge. Titan sprang upright with a snarl, the sound of which resonated in the pit of Anthony's chest. A small chorus of gasps rose from the bystanders. It was the first time Titan had shown open aggression, and the immediate hush that fell signaled everyone knew the moment for caution had passed. Despite the wave of adrenaline surging through him, Anthony kept a firm hold on the leash. He could practically feel Titan's heart hammering, could sense the dog's urge to protect him by any means necessary. Brad, for his part, seemed caught between exhilaration and intimidation. The sneer on his face faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty that he tried to mask with a smirk. "Easy there," Brad muttered, mock raising his hands. "Didn't mean to spook your big guard dog." His words were drenched in sarcasm, yet the undertone of actual fear was creeping in. Tony and Dex shot each other worried glances. This was no longer a fun little show of intimidation. They were flirting with genuine danger. A trained poimandan, especially one that had once served in law enforcement, was not something to provoke lightly. Anthony stood, positioning himself beside Titan, one hand on the German shepherd's collar. "That's enough," he said, voice trembling with equal measures of anger and apprehension. "You've made your point, whatever it is. Just leave." For a moment, Brad did nothing but stare. The hush around them remained thick, broken only by the quickened breathing of onlookers. Then Tony snorted in an attempt to break the tension. "You gonna take orders from a blind guy and his dog, Brad?" he goaded, though his voice trembled slightly, revealing his own unease. Murmurs spread through the small crowd. A few people had already dialed 911, whispering into their phones as they stepped away. Others had begun filming more openly, determined to document whatever might happen next. Anthony could sense the shift in the crowd's energy, a growing readiness to intervene, spurred by moral outrage at Brad's bullying. Brad's smirk returned, but it looked more forced than before. "This is all just a misunderstanding," he claimed, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm not trying to hurt anyone. We're just having a little fun." "Doesn't look like fun to me," said a voice behind him. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap stepped forward, placing himself between Brad and the rest of the tables. "You're harassing a visually impaired man and his service dog. Now back off." His stance was firm, and his voice carried the weight of someone who wouldn't hesitate to intervene physically if required. For the first time, Tony and Dex appeared concerned enough to consider leaving. They nudged Brad, muttering something under their breath. Perhaps it was the presence of the growing crowd or the potential threat of law enforcement. But the bravado in Brad's eyes flickered again. Still he lingered, hooking his thumbs in his belt loops as though he was entitled to decide exactly when and how to end this standoff. Anthony's knuckles had turned white from gripping the leash so tightly. Titan's growl continued, rumbling deep from within his chest, and Anthony feared that any sudden movement from Brad could trigger an instinctive defensive attack. The possibility filled him with dread. He did not want Titan to end up blamed, or worse yet, taken away because of an altercation. Somehow he had to bring this to a close before things escalated any further. Brad locked eyes with Anthony, though Anthony himself perceived only the direction of Brad's voice and posture. The hush around them was unnerving. No birds chirped, no idle chatter flowed, and even passing cars seemed to hold their breath. Titan maintained his guard, a living shield whose every muscle twitched in anticipation. Anthony could almost sense Titan's internal calculation. At what point does the dog interpret Brad's behavior as a direct assault worthy of immediate intervention? The newcomer in the baseball cap took a step closer, his arms folded. "Time's up," he stated flatly, nodding toward Brad. "Either leave or deal with the consequences. You have no right to be picking on him, or anyone else for that matter." Brad's mouth curled in a derisive sneer. He looked around at the ring of people forming, phones aloft, eyes filled with resentment for his bullying. Tony and Dex were fidgeting. Nobody laughed anymore. Not even a shred of amusement lingered in the tension-choked air. At last, Brad let out a snort, shaking his head as if to cast off the entire scenario. "Fine," he spat. "We're leaving, all right? This place is too uptight anyway." Relieved murmurs rippled through the crowd, though the tension hadn't fully dissipated. Tony and Dex both nodded, throwing glances at the uniform stares pointed their way. Even as they edged toward their motorcycles, Brad paused, leveling a final glare at Anthony. "Watch yourself," he muttered, his tone laced with vague threat. "You never know what might happen out there." Titan let out another low growl, as if issuing a final warning in return. Anthony's chest felt tight. Though deeply unsettled, he forced a calm facade, refusing to dignify Brad's comment with a response. People gradually gave the three bikers a wide berth, clearing a path for them to walk back to their machines. The rev of the engine shattered the silence, and in seconds, the trio roared off, leaving an acrid stench of exhaust and tension in their wake. A collective sigh seemed to rise from the onlookers. A handful of people approached Anthony, offering words of support or asking if he was all right. Titan finally relaxed the rigid tension in his body, though he remained attentive, ears flicking periodically as if doubting the biker's departure was real. The man in the baseball cap turned to Anthony. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, voice tinged with concern. Anthony nodded, though his heart was still hammering. "Thank you," he said softly. "I appreciate your help." The man gave him a small, supportive smile. "I couldn't stand by and let them threaten you," he replied simply, tipping his cap in a friendly gesture before stepping back to the small crowd that had gathered. At length, the cafe manager, whom Anthony knew by voice as Mel, emerged, her expression a mix of anger and worry. "Anthony, that was terrifying. I'm so sorry you had to go through this. Are you all right? Do you need anything?" she asked, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm fine," Anthony managed, though his voice quivered slightly. Titan did what he's trained to do, but I'll admit, that was the most intense situation we've faced in a long time. As if to underscore Anthony's words, Titan placed his head against Anthony's leg, a show of comfort and connection. Mel shook her head, disbelief still etched on her face. "I can't believe they'd try to harass someone like that, especially here." Around them, the cafe's patrons began resuming their seats, talking in low voices about the confrontation they'd just witnessed. Some still hovered protectively, eyeing Anthony and Titan as if to ensure no further harm would befall them. A weighty silence settled over Anthony as the reality of the encounter set in. His hands shook slightly, and though the threat had passed for now, an uneasy feeling lingered. He stroked Titan's fur, grateful for the dog's unwavering loyalty, and prepared to move on with his day, yet unable to fully ignore the possibility of seeing Brad again. Later that afternoon, Anthony returned to his small, tidy apartment on the second floor of an older brick building near the edge of town. Usually coming home brought a soothing sense of familiarity, the subtle scent of the hallway's cleaning solution, the echo of each footstep against the worn wooden stairs, the well-practiced routine of unlocking his door. But on this day, even the comfort of home couldn't entirely banish the lingering echoes of Brad's sneering face or the ominous threat he'd muttered before leaving. Inside, Titan padded around the living room, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor. Anthony set his cane by the coat rack and exhaled a shaky breath, trying to release the tensions of the morning. A swirl of conflicting emotions flooded him. Relief that the confrontation had ended without physical harm, gratitude for the bystanders who stepped in, and a gnawing worry that Brad's parting words might not be an idle remark. He filled Titan's water bowl and moved to the kitchenette to brew tea, hoping the warm liquid would soothe his nerves. As he waited for the kettle to whistle, Anthony found himself replaying the confrontation in his mind. He pictured each moment: Brad's snide commentary, the scrape of the chair, Titan's protective growl. Even though he'd faced challenges throughout his life, from adjusting to vision loss to learning how to navigate the world with a guide dog, he had rarely encountered such blatant aggression. Titan, for his part, seemed restless. The German Shepherd paced near the front door, occasionally pausing to listen intently. The slightest sound from the street or the building corridor made him perk up. Anthony recognized these signs of ongoing alertness. Titan hadn't fully decompressed from the tension either. Setting his mug of tea on the living room table, Anthony crouched beside the dog, running a hand over his back. "Hey, it's all right," he murmured. Titan leaned into the touch, though his ears remained pricked. "I know you're worried, boy, but hopefully that's the last we'll see of Brad." A twinge of doubt caught in Anthony's throat, but he tried to sound resolute for Titan's sake. He sank into an armchair, sipping his tea and running through possible next steps. Maybe he should file a police report, just in case. The cafe's manager had likely captured some security footage, and several bystanders had been filming with their phones. Anthony hesitated, aware that confrontation with Brad could escalate if he pressed charges. But ignoring the incident might leave him vulnerable if Brad decided to come after him again. A subtle tension lay heavy in the apartment's air, persisting even as the sun dipped low outside. Eventually, Anthony tried to distract himself by preparing dinner. Chopping vegetables and measuring out spices had always been therapeutic, giving his hands something constructive to do. Titan lingered in the kitchen, ever watchful. An occasional rattle from the hallway made him stiffen, but each time the noise proved to be just a neighbor returning home or footsteps echoing from the adjacent stairwell. After dinner, Anthony seated himself on the couch with Titan resting at his feet. Darkness settled over Greenhill, and the usual hush of nightfall crept in through the windows. In the quiet, Anthony's mind drifted back to the memory of Titan's intense growl and the biker's parting threat. "We're safe here," he told himself, though his voice was subdued. A faint chill ran through him, and he found himself stroking Titan's ears for comfort more than once. Even with the lights turned low, the apartment felt both snug and vulnerable at the same time. Anthony resolved that if anything more happened, if he heard so much as a suspicious shuffle outside his door, he would contact the authorities. The kettle of fear that had boiled during the day still simmered beneath his composure, and Titan's watchful eyes suggested the dog felt much the same. The next morning dawned with a pale golden sky, the early rays of sunlight peeking through Anthony's thin curtains. Normally, he rose feeling refreshed, guided by Titan's eager nudges to start the day. But this time he awoke with the weight of anxiety pressing down on him. Sleep had been fitful, peppered with half-remembered dreams of squealing chairs and threatening voices. He went through his routine on autopilot, feeding Titan, brewing a fresh pot of coffee, and carefully making his bed. Every so often, a stray sound outside, like a car door slamming or the distant hum of an engine, startled him enough that his hand froze. Titan seemed equally on edge, frequently positioning himself near the apartment door as if expecting trouble. Around 8 o'clock, Anthony decided that staying cooped up inside would do neither of them any good. Gwen's Coffee Haven, the site of yesterday's confrontation, was also the place where he found daily camaraderie and a sense of normal life. Should he risk going back so soon? A pang of doubt tugged at him, but Anthony was resolute. Giving in to fear would mean letting Brad win. He had built a life in Green Hill that he cherished, and it wasn't going to be derailed by one incident if he could help it. Titan's ears twitched, picking up on Anthony's preparations to leave. Putting on a light jacket, Anthony clipped Titan's harness in place, murmuring, "Ready to go, buddy?" Titan answered with a soft wag of his tail. Despite the underlying tension, the dog's loyalty and enthusiasm for guiding never waned. With that small reassurance, Anthony took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out into the hallway. The building was quiet, the faint aroma of someone's breakfast floating through the air. Anthony's cane tapped softly on the stairs as he descended, Titan trotting carefully beside him. Outside, the morning was crisp, and the few passers-by seemed absorbed in their own routines. The memory of Brad and his friends lingered, but the peaceful surroundings offered some respite. During the walk to Gwen's, Anthony tried to let the familiarity of the route center him. The feel of the sidewalk beneath his feet, the distant rumble of buses, and the breeze carrying the scent of fresh flowers from a small roadside garden. Titan guided him adeptly around any obstacles, pausing only when necessary. Step by step, Anthony felt a small measure of his confidence returning, bolstered by Titan's unwavering presence. When they arrived at Gwen's Coffee Haven, a swirl of tension and relief mingled in Anthony's stomach. The place appeared just as it had every morning, tables arranged neatly outside, the soft chatter of early patrons drifting in the air. A part of him had feared that seeing the cafe again would trigger a flood of anxiety, but instead, he felt an odd calm. Maybe confronting the memory head-on was better than avoiding it. Megan, one of the baristas, spotted Anthony approaching. She immediately came out, concern in her eyes. "Anthony, how are you?" she asked gently. "I was worried after yesterday." Titan settled into a sit beside Anthony while he offered Megan a faint smile. "I'm managing," he replied. "Figured I'd come by and see if things have calmed down." She nodded, relief evident in her tone. "Things are fine here. Everyone's been talking about what happened, though. You caused quite a stir, but people were mostly upset at that guy and his friends." A flicker of distaste crossed her face at the memory. "I'm just glad you're okay." "Thanks," Anthony said, patting Titan's head. "Me too." Megan urged him inside, suggesting he wait at one of the quiet indoor tables for a change. Anthony agreed, recognizing the subtle gesture of protection. As he took a seat with Titan by his side, the hum of the cafe enveloped him. He breathed in the comforting scent of ground coffee, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. Despite the incident, life rolled on, and Anthony intended to keep living it. Fear would not be his guide. No sooner had Anthony settled into his seat than the soft tinkle of the cafe door announced another arrival. He felt Titan shift at his feet, the dog's ears perking in alert. Glancing around out of reflex, though he could not see, Anthony tried to gauge whether the newcomer was someone benign or someone to fear. Megan, bringing over Anthony's usual cappuccino, paused momentarily, then continued toward him. Her expression was neutral, giving Anthony no immediate reason to worry. "Here you go," she said, placing the warm cup within his reach. Anthony nodded in thanks, inhaling the rich, comforting aroma. Titan relaxed again, evidently sensing no immediate threat. Business at Gwen's Coffee Haven continued as usual. A handful of other customers strolled in, some greeting Anthony by name, asking how he was holding up. Word of yesterday's disturbance had spread rapidly. Anthony offered polite reassurance, trying not to dwell on it. He wanted so badly to reclaim a sense of normalcy. After about 15 minutes, the door chimed once more. This time, however, Titan let out a low, nearly inaudible rumble in his throat. Anthony's spine stiffened, recalling that same subtle warning from the day before. He leaned down, resting a hand on Titan's collar. "Easy," he murmured. A hush fell over the nearby tables, and even Megan at the espresso machine noticed the tension. Footsteps approached, slow and cautious. Anthony heard a male voice clear his throat. "Hey," the stranger said, his tone measured. "Is your name Anthony Hughes?" The question was direct, and the mention of his full name put Anthony on edge. The voice was unfamiliar, deeper than Brad's, lacking the mocking swagger. Still, Anthony's pulse quickened. Who else could be seeking him out like this? "Yes," he replied, keeping his voice calm but guarded. Titan remained alert, though he didn't growl again. The man inhaled as if steeling himself. "I'm Neil," he said. I heard about what happened yesterday with my cousin Brad." At that admission, a wave of apprehension pulsed through Anthony. Titan sensed it, tensing at his feet. The cafe turned notably quieter. Several patrons looked over, recognizing the name Brad instantly. Megan placed a half-finished latte on the counter and came around, prepared to intervene if necessary. Anthony's hand shook slightly. "Your cousin?" he echoed, voice tight. Memories of the confrontation rushed back in a flood. The scraping chair, the jarring laughter, the final threat. "Why are you here?" Neil exhaled. "To apologize, I guess, or at least explain. Brad told me his side of the story and it sounded bad. I wanted to see if you were okay. He mentioned you have a guide dog and, well, said you overreacted." A rueful twist of his mouth revealed that even Neil didn't fully believe Brad's version. Megan stepped closer, ready to step in if Anthony signaled he was uncomfortable. Titan studied Neil intently but didn't growl. That in itself was telling. Perhaps there was no immediate threat here. Anthony let out a slow breath, forcing himself to remain composed. "I didn't overreact," he said firmly. "Your cousin was harassing me and my dog. He even kicked a chair at Titan, nearly hitting him." Neil sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I figured something like that might have happened," he admitted. "Brad can be impulsive, and I'm not excusing him. Look, I'm here on my own. He doesn't even know I'm talking to you. I wanted to make sure you're all right and let you know he's not planning on coming back, if that eases your mind at all." A flicker of relief mingled with Anthony's lingering distrust. He glanced in Megan's direction, sensing her curiosity as well. "And you expect me to just believe you?" he asked, the edge in his voice betraying how raw his emotions still were from the ordeal. Neil lifted his hands, palms out in a gesture of sincerity. "I get it. There's no reason for you to trust me. But I just wanted to say something, man. Nobody deserves to be targeted like that, least of all anybody with a service dog." Anthony took a moment, choosing his next words carefully. "Well," he said at last, "I appreciate the concern, if that's truly why you're here, but after what happened, I hope you understand I'm not exactly eager to talk about it." Titan relaxed a fraction, as if acknowledging that Neil's posture and tone were not threatening. Even so, the tension in the air remained thick, and Anthony sensed the rest of the cafe was just as wary, waiting to see how this unusual conversation would unfold. Neil nodded, swallowing hard. The cafe patrons had fallen silent, many of them straining to catch the exchange. It wasn't every day that the relative of a troublemaker walked in offering something akin to an apology. Still, the atmosphere radiated apprehension. Titan stayed seated, but his alert posture suggested he was ready to spring into action if anything shifted. "I can only imagine how you feel," Neil said, voice subdued. "Look, I know Brad can be a jerk, and what he did was unforgivable. I'm not here to defend him. I just want to make sure you're okay and that you know he won't be bothering you again." He shrugged, his eyes darting to the floor. "If it helps, I told him off for being such an idiot. I doubt he'll be riding around here anytime soon." A slight stir of relief rippled across the people listening. The tension seemed to ease by a fraction, though skepticism lingered in the air. Anthony, leaning slightly toward Neil's voice, could hear what sounded like genuine remorse. Yet trauma still prickled beneath his skin. Yesterday's incident wasn't merely an embarrassing moment. It had been a direct threat to his sense of security and the safety of Titan. Megan, ever protective, cleared her throat. "And how do we know he won't come back?" she asked pointedly. "Words are cheap. If he was willing to harass Anthony once, he might do it again." Her gaze didn't waver, and a couple of nearby customers nodded in agreement. They'd seen the way Brad had lashed out and were understandably hesitant to take Neil's assurances at face value. Neil sighed, shoulders sagging. "That's fair," he acknowledged. "I don't have a crystal ball. But Brad isn't known for hitting the same place twice if he's had a run-in with the police, or nearly did." His expression was apologetic, almost pained. "I tried to tell him he was out of line. He got defensive, but I think your reaction and your dog scared him off enough that he won't try it again." At the mention of Titan, Anthony reached down to pat the dog's head. "We'll see," he said quietly, voice wary. "Either way, I'm not going to change my routine out of fear." The small statement carried the weight of his resolve. Anthony had long refused to let his blindness deter him from living as independently as possible. He wouldn't let a bully change that now. A respectful hush followed. Neil nodded, mustering a small smile. Well, I just wanted to come here in person. I guess I should leave you be. He hesitated a moment, then added, if you ever have any more trouble, God forbid, here's my number. From his pocket, he produced a small slip of paper. He inched forward, cautiously placing it on the table near Anthony's coffee cup. Anthony heard the soft rustle of paper but didn't reach for it immediately. Thanks, he said curtly. He wasn't sure if he'd ever call, but it felt marginally reassuring to have some line of communication, however tenuous. Neil turned to go, then hesitated one last time. For what it's worth, he said, meeting Anthony's sunglasses directly, I'm sorry this happened to you, man. My cousin can be a real piece of work, but you didn't deserve that. Without waiting for a response, he glanced at Megan, who wore a guarded but somewhat softened expression, then walked out of the cafe. Only after the door closed behind Neil did the murmuring begin again. Patrons exchanged low comments, some shaking their heads, others expressing a cautious sense of relief. Anthony's grip on Titan's harness loosened, and the dog released a slow exhale. Megan stepped over. You okay? She asked, eyes flicking to the slip of paper on the table. Anthony nodded, though his nerves still hummed. He wasn't quite sure how to feel about Neil's visit. Nonetheless, a fraction of the burden eased, a glimmer of hope that maybe Brad wouldn't darken the doorstep again. The remainder of Anthony's day passed in a swirl of unsettled thoughts. After Neil's visit, he lingered at the cafe for a while, trying to process the conflicting sense of relief and lingering apprehension. Megan brought him a fresh cappuccino on the house, and a few regular patrons approached to express their support. Some shared their own stories of having faced bullying or intimidation, forging a momentary bond of solidarity. Titan, for his part, stayed vigilant, but relaxed enough to rest his chin on Anthony's shoe, a silent pillar of comfort. Eventually, Anthony decided to head home. He folded up the slip of paper bearing Neil's number and tucked it into his pocket. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm, and the hum of distant traffic in Green Hills Main Street felt almost comforting. Titan guided him down the sidewalk with the same steady precision as always, weaving gently around pedestrians and pausing at intersections. Despite the reassurance of daily routines, Anthony couldn't fully shake the unease that clung to him like a stubborn shadow. Back at his apartment, he let Titan off the harness and sank onto the couch. The slip of paper weighed on his mind. He traced its edges between his fingers, debating whether to simply toss it or keep it in a drawer. In truth, having a direct line to someone connected to Brad might be useful if things ever escalated, though a part of him disliked the idea of relying on Neil in any capacity. It felt like a tacit admission that Brad still held some control over his life. Setting aside the internal debate for the moment, Anthony decided to busy himself with household chores, hoping mundane tasks might ground him. He swept the living room floor, washed dishes from earlier in the day, and tried to lose himself in the routine. Titan followed him from room to room, occasionally nudging Anthony's leg as if to ask, "Are we really safe?" Each time, Anthony would kneel down and give Titan a reassuring pat, silently reminding both of them that they had faced adversity before and emerged intact. By early evening, Anthony found his thoughts returning to the idea of filing a report. The memory of Brad's aggression and the way he kicked that chair toward Titan still burned in his mind. Even if Brad didn't plan on returning, what if he cornered someone else in a similar manner? Anthony's conscience tugged at him. Was it right to let it go just because he had escaped without physical harm? On the other hand, he had no clear evidence aside from eyewitness accounts. Many had filmed the altercation, yes, but whether they'd share their videos or if the police would act on them was uncertain. Anthony acknowledged that confronting law enforcement often required time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. Could he handle that stress on top of everything else? Staring out the window, Anthony ran his fingertips along Titan's ears. The dog leaned into him, offering quiet, steadfast support. "What do you think, buddy?" Anthony asked aloud, although he knew Titan's answer was locked in canine intuition rather than human language. Titan responded by nuzzling Anthony's hand, and in that simple gesture, Anthony found a hint of resolve. He still wasn't sure what path to take regarding a formal complaint, but he decided to at least speak to Mel, the cafe manager, about collecting any footage or witness statements. The evening stretched out, filled with the gentle hum of the apartment's appliances and the ambient sounds of neighbors going about their lives. Anthony cooked a modest dinner, feeding Titan first as always. Afterward, they settled on the couch again, the television flickering softly in the background. Restlessness made it impossible to focus on any show. Yet a small glimmer of relief danced at the edges of Anthony's consciousness. Neil's words echoed faintly, suggesting Brad might stay away for good. Maybe, just maybe, this chapter was closing, allowing normalcy to reclaim the spaces where fear had briefly taken hold. That very evening, Anthony found himself pacing back and forth in his small living room, the slip of paper with Neil's number resting on the coffee table. Titan watched his every movement, the dog's head tilting slightly as if trying to decode Anthony's internal struggle. Anthony's thoughts churned. Should he try calling Neil to confirm that Brad really intended to stay away? Or would that open a door to further entanglement in Brad's affairs? The notion of placing any trust in someone related to the man who had harassed him felt risky, yet the idea of doing nothing weighed on him too. If Brad ever decided to retaliate, Anthony wanted at least one measure of advance warning. Eventually, he settled on a compromise. He would inform the cafe manager, Mel, that Neil had reached out, and together they might decide on the best course of action. Perhaps Mel, having witnessed some of the altercation, could gather statements or video clips from the customers who filmed it. That way, they'd have evidence should Brad reappear or escalate his behavior. Anthony figured that a united front, a partnership with Mel and possibly other bystanders, would be more reassuring than trying to handle everything alone. Unable to stand the tension in the apartment any longer, Anthony picked up his phone and called Gwen's Coffee Haven. Mel answered, her warm but businesslike tone instantly turning to concern when she recognized Anthony's voice. He explained in measured detail about Neil's visit to the cafe earlier in the day and his own uncertainty regarding the next steps. Mel listened quietly, occasionally murmuring words of encouragement. When Anthony finished, she suggested they meet in person the following morning to discuss a plan, possibly involving the local authorities. Relief flooded Anthony's chest. He felt better just knowing that Mel was in his corner, ready to gather footage and testimonies if needed. He thanked her before hanging up, stroking Titan's ears to quell the dog's restlessness. "We'll figure this out, buddy," Anthony said, though his voice still quivered with residual tension. Titan responded by pressing closer to him, as if offering silent reassurance. Night descended slowly on Greenhill, the windows in Anthony's apartment glowing with the soft orange hue of streetlights. Outside, distant engines revved and faded, occasionally making Titan lift his head in alert. But no ominous roar of motorcycles lingered around the building tonight. No sign of Brad or his crew. Anthony tried to relax, cooking a small meal and playing soothing music on his radio. Yet his mind felt like a taut string, vibrating with each small noise. Before bed, he double-checked all the locks, something he rarely bothered to do so meticulously. Titan trailed him from door to window, ears perked, tail occasionally wagging in a half-hearted display of normalcy. Anthony recognized that Titan was picking up on his lingering anxiety. "I'm sorry," Anthony whispered, pausing to kneel beside the dog. "I know you can sense it. I'm just wound up." The German Shepherd leaned in, licking Anthony's cheek with a comforting gesture, and for a moment the knot in Anthony's chest loosened. By the time Anthony finally climbed into bed, the midnight hour was approaching. He laid awake for what felt like ages, drifting in and out of half-sleep, startled at times by the creaking of old pipes or the distant slam of a car door. Still, he managed to find pockets of rest, buoyed by the knowledge that he wasn't alone in this. Mel, Megan, and even the other patrons at Gwen's Coffee Haven were on his side, and most importantly, Titan was with him every step of the way. The next morning arrived with the promise of a fresh start, the early sunlight casting golden rectangles on Anthony's living room floor. He and Titan left the apartment earlier than usual, hoping to reach Gwen's Coffee Haven before the morning rush. The air felt cool and slightly damp, a clue that autumn was nudging its way into Greenhill. Titan seemed calmer than the previous day, though still attuned to every passing sound. As they walked, Anthony mentally rehearsed how he would explain things to Mel. He would describe Neil's demeanor, mention his apology, and his promise that Brad wouldn't return, and then they could decide together if they should involve the local authorities in a more formal capacity. A part of Anthony felt a twinge of guilt. He despised the idea of making a scene. But given Brad's aggression, it might be the safest route to protect not only himself and Titan, but other patrons who frequent the cafe. By the time they reached Gwen's, the sun had climbed high enough to bathe the sidewalk in a crisp light. At least half a dozen customers were already seated outside, sipping lattes and munching on croissants. Anthony spotted Megan through the shop window, busily operating the espresso machine. The smell of fresh pastries wafted out, momentarily easing the tension in his chest. He took a deep breath, letting Titan guide him to the doorway. The moment Anthony stepped inside, Mel waved him over. "Anthony, she said softly, ushering him toward a quiet corner table, away from the main bustle. "Let's chat." Titan followed closely, settling at Anthony's feet the moment he took a seat. Despite the usual warmth and coziness of Gwen's, Anthony could still feel tendrils of unease curling at the edges of his mind. "So," Mel began, leaning in, "tell me everything about this Neil fellow. You said he came by yesterday?" Anthony recounted the conversation, keeping his voice low. He explained how Neil claimed he had confronted Brad, insisting the latter wouldn't bother Anthony again. Mel listened attentively, occasionally tapping her pen on a notepad she'd brought along. When he finished, Mel sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "This might be a sincere effort on Neil's part," she admitted. "But it's still unsettling. We can't forget what Brad did. He scared everyone and he threatened Titan." Her eyes flicked down to the dog, who lifted his head at the mention of his name. "I've spoken to a few regulars who were here that day. Many have video clips of the confrontation. I think we should gather them in one place. Maybe store them on a flash drive. That way, if Brad ever comes back, we have evidence to show the police." Anthony nodded, relief mingled with a hint of trepidation. "That sounds like a smart plan," he agreed, reaching down to give Titan a reassuring pat. "I don't want to escalate things unnecessarily, but it might be the only way to protect ourselves if he does show up again." Mel glanced around to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "There's also the question of whether you want to file a police report now," she said quietly. "You have every right to. We can present the videos. It doesn't guarantee an arrest, but it documents the incident in case something else happens." Anthony hesitated, weighing the emotional toll of filing a formal report. At length he nodded, a determined resolve settling over his features. "Let's do it. I'd rather have this on record than regret it later." Mel patted his arm in solidarity, and Titan, as if sensing the importance of the moment, gave a small thump of his tail on the floor. Outside, customers carried on with their breakfast rituals, unaware of the intensity of Anthony's decision. Yet for him, it felt like a line being drawn, a stand against intimidation, a refusal to live in fear. Even though his heart still fluttered with anxiety, having a plan in place and the support of allies kindled a small flame of confidence within him. After wrapping up the discussion with Mel, Anthony felt a mixture of resolve and lingering apprehension. The plan was straightforward enough: gather witness statements and videos from the cafe's patrons, document the incident with the police, and keep an eye out for any sign that Brad might return. Yet, even a solid plan couldn't erase the unsettling memory of that twisted grin on Brad's face or the way Tony and Dex had laughed when they saw Titan's reaction. Seeking a brief respite from the heaviness of the conversation, Anthony ordered a freshly baked muffin and a cup of herbal tea. He sat at a small table by the window, letting Titan rest at his feet. The gentle hum of espresso machines and the playful chatter of a few customers gave the morning a semblance of normalcy. Megan passed by occasionally, flashing Anthony an encouraging smile. Midway through his muffin, Anthony heard the cafe door swing open and felt the atmosphere shift slightly. At first he tensed. Had Brad returned, defying all logic and warnings? But Titan did not bristle, and the low murmurs of conversation continued unabated. Exhaling a subdued sigh of relief, Anthony took another sip of tea, focusing on the sweet, calming warmth spreading through his chest. Moments later, someone approached his table. "Excuse me, Anthony?" came a hesitant voice, an older gentleman by the sound of it. Anthony recognized the voice as belonging to the man in the baseball cap who had intervened the day of the altercation. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I saw what happened with those bikers. I have a bit of that on my phone." He cleared his throat, obviously uneasy about bringing it up. Anthony nodded appreciatively. "You're not bothering me at all. I'm actually collecting any videos or statements people are willing to share. Mel and I think it might help if we compile evidence. Titan lifted his head to inspect the newcomer, but relaxed once he recognized the man's familiar scent and voice from the previous incident. The gentleman fumbled with his phone, eventually pulling up a short video clip. He narrated it for Anthony's benefit, describing the shaky footage of Brad kicking the chair, the startled gasps from the crowd, and Titan's defensive posture. Though Anthony couldn't see the video himself, the detailed description, coupled with his own memory, was enough to bring back a wave of tension. Still, he forced himself to remain calm. This was necessary. He thanked the man, who offered to email the clip to Mel. "I hope it never comes to needing all this," the man remarked. "But better safe than sorry. You don't deserve that kind of harassment." Anthony responded with a quiet, heartfelt thanks, feeling a renewed sense of camaraderie. It wasn't easy to stand up to bullies, even as a bystander, so he truly valued the courage this man had shown. As the gentleman left, Anthony sat in silence, absorbing the gravity of the situation. He realized that in times of crisis, communities could either splinter or come together. Here, it seemed people were choosing to unite around him, offering support in the form of video evidence and moral backing. The flutter of anxiety in his chest eased a notch. Titan, sensing the shift in Anthony's mood, gave a small wag of his tail. Taking one last bite of his muffin, Anthony silently promised himself he would see this through. Brad had threatened him, but Anthony wouldn't stand by passively. He had Titan, he had Mel, and he had a community that, though small, was standing firmly beside him. The rest of the day unfolded in a calm but deliberate manner. After finishing at the cafe, Anthony accompanied Mel to a quiet back office, where they began organizing the various video clips and statements. Mel had set up a laptop specifically for this purpose, carefully labeling files with dates and short descriptions so they could be easily referenced later. While Anthony couldn't see the screen, he sat beside her, listening as she read out each file name. Clip from Sarah's phone shows Brad leaning over the table. Video from Tim's tablet captures the moment the chair was kicked, and so on. Hearing each piece of evidence described triggered a flicker of tension in Anthony's chest, reminding him how close things had come to real violence. Yet, he also felt an undercurrent of gratitude for those who had stepped in or recorded footage, ensuring that Brad wouldn't get away with calling it just a misunderstanding. In a way, the documentation felt like armor, a collective stand that said, "Deutsch, we see you and we won't allow this." After organizing the files, Mel proposed that she send everything to Anthony's email addresses so he'd have a personal record. Anthony agreed. Even if he couldn't view the videos himself, he could forward them to the authorities if necessary. "We'll reach out to the police station next," Mel said, turning the laptop off. "We might need to schedule a time for you to give an official statement. Are you okay with that?" Anthony exhaled, steeling himself. "Yes," he replied, though a note of nervousness crept into his tone. "I think it's the right thing to do." Titan lay quietly at his feet, but Anthony could tell the dog was still on alert. Each time a voice in the hallway rose above a murmur, Titan's ears flicked. The atmosphere in the cafe office remained serious, and yet there was a shared resolve. Together they drafted a brief summary of the incident in writing, double-checking the details. Mel insisted that accuracy was paramount. She wanted the police to see the extent of the intimidation, the fact that Brad had specifically targeted a man with a guide dog, and that physical aggression was involved. The more meticulously they documented, Mel reasoned, the harder it would be for Brad to weasel his way out if charges were filed. When they concluded, Anthony stood, leaning on Titan for balance. "Thank you, Mel," he said quietly but earnestly. "This means a lot." She shook her head. "You deserve to feel safe in your neighborhood," she replied, voice tinged with conviction. "We all do. Don't worry, we'll get this handled." It was late afternoon by the time Anthony and Titan headed home. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. As they walked, Anthony replayed the day's steps in his mind, collecting videos, drafting statements, preparing to contact the police. In some ways, the process was unnerving, stirring up memories he'd rather forget. But in others, it was empowering, a communal act of self-advocacy. Back at his apartment, Anthony tried to relax. He fed Titan, then sat at his small kitchen table to eat a modest dinner. The quiet of the evening felt more tolerable now that he knew he wasn't alone in confronting Brad's bullying. Titan curled up beside his chair, resting his chin on Anthony's foot. And despite the tension in his life, Anthony discovered a newfound sense of calm in that simple domestic moment. Like the lull before a storm he was now prepared to face head-on. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Anthony found himself lying awake, the glow of a street lamp filtering through the window blinds. Titan dozed at the foot of the bed, occasionally twitching in dream, but Anthony's mind buzzed with questions about the upcoming conversation with the police. Would they take the matter seriously? Would Brad try to retaliate if the police reached out to him? And what if, despite all their evidence, the authorities concluded there was no solid case? Eventually, he drifted into an uneasy slumber, only to startle awake around 3 in the morning at the sound of a distant motorcycle revving. Heart pounding, he strained to listen, but the noise receded. Titan stirred too, lifting his head, but soon settled back down. And Anthony let out a shuddering breath. Every rumble of an engine at night now seemed like a harbinger of trouble, a weight pressing on his chest. By morning, Anthony felt groggy but forced himself to stick to his usual routine. He showered, got dressed, and fed Titan. Today was the day they'd planned to go to the local police station with Mel. Though the appointment wasn't until the afternoon, anxiety made every hour crawl. After pacing his apartment, Anthony finally decided to walk around the block with Titan, hoping the exercise would burn off nervous energy. Green Hill streets looked peaceful at this time of day, bathed in a gentle sunlight that illuminated the pastel walls of the small shops and cafes. Children laughed in a nearby park, and the faint clink of dishes from a nearby diner wafted out. The scene felt worlds away from the memory of that confrontation in front of Gwen's Coffee Haven. Yet the tension in Anthony's shoulders refused to fully release. When the afternoon rolled around, Anthony met Mel outside the police station. The building itself was a modest brick structure with a small parking lot. Titan sniffed at the neatly trimmed hedges near the entrance, while Mel clutched a manila folder packed with printouts of various statements and references to video files. "You ready?" she asked, giving Anthony's arm a supportive squeeze. "As ready as I'll ever be," he replied, voice tight. Titan offered an encouraging wag of his tail. Together, they stepped inside, greeted by the faint hum of fluorescent lights. A front desk officer politely asked for their names and the nature of their visit. Mel explained the situation with measured clarity, and the officer nodded, guiding them to a waiting area with several plastic chairs. Minutes later, a detective named Reed appeared, greeting them with a firm handshake. "Let's find a private room to talk," he suggested. The detective led them down a corridor into a small interview space. The walls were gray, lit by a single overhead lamp. A desk, 2 chairs, and a small recording device were the only furnishings. Titan settled beside Anthony's chair, quietly observing. Reed began by inviting Anthony to recount the incident in his own words, occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions. Mel produced her folder, summarizing the collected evidence and offering to share contact information for witnesses. Though the detective's demeanor was professional, Anthony sensed an undercurrent of empathy. Reed seemed genuinely disturbed by the details of Brad's intimidation tactics. Over the next half hour, they covered every angle: how Brad had approached Anthony, the threats he'd made, the potential for Tony and Dex's involvement. Reed took meticulous notes, occasionally pressing record on the device to capture Anthony's official statement. Though it felt draining to rehash the confrontation, Anthony pushed through, spurred by the knowledge that every detail he provided could help forestall future violence. When at last the interview wrapped up, Detective Reed assured them he would review all the evidence. "We can't promise immediate action," he cautioned, "but this is definitely worth documenting. If Brad or his associates threaten you again, call us right away." Anthony nodded, his shoulders sagging with both relief and lingering uncertainty. Exiting the police station, Anthony found the late afternoon sun almost blinding, though it was just a bright wash of warmth he perceived through the haze of his limited vision. Mel walked beside him, the manila folder noticeably lighter now that she'd handed over most of its contents to Detective Reed. Titan trotted faithfully at Anthony's side, as if sensing his owner's fatigue. "How do you feel?" Mel asked softly. Anthony sighed, pressing a hand against Titan's back for grounding. "Relieved in a way," he admitted, "but also tired. Talking through every detail just reminded me how threatening Brad really was." Mel nodded, her expression sympathetic. She glanced around the parking lot, perhaps half expecting to see a motorcycle lurking behind a car. But all was still and calm. They took a leisurely pace heading toward the street. Though Anthony typically relied on Titan for mobility, Mel walked close enough that he could sense her presence. As they reached the sidewalk, a gentle breeze carried the distant chatter of people and the occasional hum of a passing car. For a moment, it felt like a normal day in Greenhill. No drama, no looming threats. Anthony latched onto that feeling, savoring it. Over the coming days, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Gwen's Coffee Haven continued to operate as usual, with Mel and Megan discreetly checking in on Anthony whenever he dropped by. True to his promise, Neil never resurfaced, and more importantly, Brad didn't either. Word had spread around town that Anthony had gone to the police, which seemed to serve as a tacit warning to those who might consider harassing him again. Yet anxiety lingered beneath the surface of Anthony's daily life. Each time he heard a motorcycle engine, his heart clenched, worrying it might be Brad returning for revenge. Titan picked up on these spikes of tension, occasionally positioning himself in front of Anthony protectively whenever they were out walking. Anthony found that both comforting and saddening. He hated that Titan felt the need to be so vigilant. One morning, while Anthony was in the midst of his usual routine, preparing breakfast, double-checking emails, his phone rang. The display read an unfamiliar number. With a slight tremor in his hand, he picked up. "Hello?" he greeted. "Hey, Anthony, this is Detective Reed," came the response. "Hope I'm not calling too early. I've got a bit of an update regarding your situation." Anthony's pulse quickened. "Oh, no, this is fine," he replied, switching the phone to his other ear so he could keep stirring his scrambled eggs. Titan watched him from across the kitchen, tail giving a small wag of curiosity. "Nothing dramatic," Reed clarified, "but we were able to track down a couple of old records on Brad. Looks like there were minor complaints in another county, mostly intimidation or small disturbances, but no major convictions. We've also flagged your case, so if anything else happens, we'll prioritize a response. It's not a guarantee we can arrest him if he shows up, but let's just say it won't go unnoticed." A wave of relief cascaded through Anthony. He thanked Reed for the update, his voice trembling slightly with gratitude. "I appreciate that. I really do." The detective ended the call with a few more reassuring words, leaving Anthony staring at his phone. Though a formal arrest or resolution was still out of reach, it felt like at least someone in authority believed him and had his back. Later that day, as Anthony recounted the conversation to Mel at the cafe, she smiled, relief evident in her eyes. "That's progress," she said, patting his shoulder. "It means if Brad tries anything else, the police will take it seriously." Anthony nodded, sipping his cappuccino. He glanced down at Titan, who lay on the floor with an air of relaxed attentiveness. "I hope it doesn't come to that," Anthony murmured, ruffling Titan's ears. In that moment, the dog looked up, exuding a calm confidence that Anthony found infectious. Days turned into a week, and then two. The crisp weather of early autumn deepened, painting the leaves of Greenhill in fiery shades of orange and red. Anthony began to relax just a little, falling back into the rhythms of his routine. He still visited Gwen's Coffee Haven regularly, often chatting with Megan or Mel about everyday things. New coffee blends, the changing weather, even minor gossip around town. Titan sensed this shift. His posture became less rigid, and his ears stopped flicking at every faint engine rumble. For a brief stretch, it almost felt like life had returned to normal, as though the tension from Brad's harassment had evaporated entirely. Anthony slept better, no longer waking at the slightest sound of a revving engine. He and Titan enjoyed leisurely walks through the park on weekends, soaking in the smell of damp leaves and the hush of morning fog. Occasionally, kids would run up, asking to pet Titan. Anthony would smile and let them, explaining that Titan was a guide dog but also loved gentle attention. One afternoon, Mel announced she'd received an email from Detective Reed. According to his message, there had been no sign of Brad or his biker companions in the area. Reed reaffirmed that Anthony's documentation remained on file and that several other patrons from Gwen's had offered to testify if needed. The news brightened everyone's spirits. Even customers who had witnessed the incident seemed more at ease, no longer glancing over their shoulders in fear of a confrontation. Yet beneath this surface calm, Anthony couldn't completely banish a niggling concern in the back of his mind. He couldn't help wondering if Brad might reappear at the most unexpected moment, driven by bitterness or a bruised ego. Though Neil's visit had provided a sort of closure, Anthony found it difficult to trust that Brad was genuinely done. Real bullies, he knew, sometimes retreated only to plan a more sinister comeback. Still, as the days passed without any sign of trouble, Anthony allowed himself to hope. He focused on practical tasks, rearranging his bookshelves so he could access them more easily, learning a new Braille display app on his phone, and helping Megan with small errands at the cafe whenever she needed an extra hand. Every now and then, Titan would perk up at a distant motorcycle, but it always turned out to be a passing stranger. During one of these calmer days, Anthony received an unexpected visitor at his apartment, a young woman named Tara, who introduced herself as Brad's ex-girlfriend. The moment he opened the door, Titan bristled, sensing a connection to the source of past trouble. Tara's eyes shone with a mix of embarrassment and sincerity as she explained why she came. "I heard through the grapevine that Brad messed with you," she said, her voice quivering slightly. "We haven't been together for a while, but I know how he can be. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, on behalf of anyone he's hurt." Caught off guard, Anthony stood in the doorway, Titan at his side, his mind spinning. Tara looked genuinely contrite, gripping the strap of her purse as though it were a lifeline. She hesitated, then added, "I don't talk to him anymore, but I can't shake the guilt. When we were together, I saw how mean he could be, but I didn't always speak up." Anthony took a moment, absorbing her words. Part of him felt protective, not wanting to let any more of Brad's drama seep into his life. Yet another part recognized that Tara too might be a victim of Brad's intimidation. He invited her in for a short conversation, and she explained that she was trying to make amends with people Brad had wronged. Although the encounter felt surreal, Anthony sensed a kind of full-circle moment. Multiple people connected to Brad were showing up, apologizing, trying to rewrite the narrative he had imposed. Tara left after a brief exchange, leaving Anthony once again torn between relief and uncertainty. Why was Brad's web of past relationships unraveling now? And did it truly mean he was out of the picture? In the wake of Tara's visit, Anthony found himself contending with mixed emotions. On one hand, it was reassuring to know that others who had once been close to Brad were acknowledging the harm he'd done. On the other, each new encounter dredged up memories of that day outside Gwen's coffee haven, the flash of Brad's foot kicking the chair, Titan's menacing growl, and the suffocating sense that violence teetered just on the edge of breaking loose. He confided these feelings to Mel over a cup of tea at the cafe. Titan lay at his side, a steadfast sentinel as always. "I'm glad people are coming forward," Anthony admitted, gently tapping the rim of his teacup. "But it also feels like I can't fully move on. Every time I start to feel normal, someone else shows up with another apology or piece of the story." Mel nodded sympathetically. Grief, anger, fear, all these things can come in waves. The fact that people are reaching out might actually be a sign that Brad's influence is waning. But I understand how it keeps stirring up old wounds. She offered a tentative smile. "At least there's no sign of him. Neil's still around, though he hasn't made any further appearances here, right?" Anthony shook his head. "No, not since that day. He gave me his number, but I never called." He paused, recalling how he'd tucked that slip of paper away in a drawer at home, uncertain if he'd ever use it. Maybe he just wanted to clear his own conscience. They fell into a companionable silence, broken only by the whirring of the espresso machine and the low chatter of other customers. After a while, Mel excused herself to help a customer at the register, leaving Anthony alone with his thoughts. He traced the rim of his teacup, contemplating whether it might be time to truly let go of the entire ordeal. Perhaps, with the police aware of the situation, and with Brad seemingly out of the picture, there was little else to do but heal and move forward. That evening, as Anthony walked home through the crisp autumn air, Titan padded alongside him, tail swishing methodically. They passed by the spot where Brad had first confronted them, an innocuous stretch of sidewalk that now held a charged memory. Anthony paused, letting his hand drift over Titan's head. A wave of gratitude surged through him, remembering how unwavering Titan had been in protecting him. "Thank you," Anthony whispered, not sure if the words were addressed to Titan or to the universe for providing him with such a companion. Titan responded by leaning into Anthony, a silent acceptance of his role. The moment felt like a small but profound turning point, a conscious decision to stop letting fear color every step. They reached Anthony's apartment without incident. Inside, he fed Titan, then flicked on a bedside lamp, illuminating the otherwise dim living space. He sat down with a book in Braille, attempting to lose himself in another world. And for the first time in weeks, he managed to concentrate on the pages in front of him, the tension in his neck easing slightly as each new sentence drew him deeper into the story. Later, as he drifted off to sleep, the usual swirl of anxious thoughts remained subdued, like a distant echo rather than a clamor at the forefront of his mind. Tara's visit, Neil's apology, and Detective Reed's ongoing vigilance had, in a strange way, created a patchwork of relief. If a final thread of closure was still missing, Anthony sensed it might come with time. For now, he lay there with Titan curled at his side, taking solace in the fact that life continued, and that even shadows eventually give way to dawn. The turning leaves soon began to fall, carpeting Green Hills streets in brilliant reds, oranges, and yellows. Anthony and Titan found themselves enjoying cooler morning walks, each step crisp underfoot. As the days shortened, Anthony realized it had been nearly a month since the altercation. No rumble of Brad's motorcycle had graced his ears, and no further unexpected visitors had knocked on his door. Slowly, the tension that had once bound his chest began to unravel, replaced by a cautious optimism. One brisk afternoon, Anthony decided to take Titan on a longer walk through a wooded trail just outside town. He loved the peacefulness there, the way Titan's ears twitched as he picked up new forest scents. The path wound through tall oaks and maples, their branches forming a golden canopy overhead. Occasionally, a breeze would stir the leaves, and they'd flutter down like gentle confetti around them. Anthony breathed in deeply, picking up the earthy scent of fallen foliage and damp soil. He paused at a small bench halfway along the trail, letting Titan rest. A scattering of leaves rustled beneath the dog's paws as he laid down. Anthony ran a hand over Titan's back, mindful of just how strong and loyal the German Shepherd was. Since that day at Gwen's Coffee Haven, Titan had demonstrated not just loyalty, but an unwavering courage that Anthony found humbling. In that quiet space, Anthony allowed his mind to revisit the events of the past few weeks from a place of relative calm. He remembered the fear, the anger, the sense of helplessness when Brad had mocked him and threatened Titan. Yet he also recalled the people who stood by him: Mel, Megan, the regular patrons, the older gentleman who had filmed evidence, and even Detective Reed, who took his statement seriously. Then there was Neil, Brad's cousin, who had tried in his own way to set things right, and Tara, who sought amends for staying silent too long. A soft sigh escaped Anthony's lips. This was life, he mused, a combination of dark and light, cruelty and kindness, weaving together to form experiences that shape who we become. He was grateful to still be able to savor the goodness: Titan's companionship, the cafe's warmth, and the small acts of humanity that had turned a frightening incident into a lesson about resilience and community. They lingered on the bench for a while longer, the forest seemingly holding them in a tranquil embrace. Eventually, Anthony stood, guiding Titan back onto the trail. As they continued, he felt lighter, as if a weight had finally lifted. Yes, Brad could still appear out of nowhere. There was always that possibility. But living in perpetual fear would only rob Anthony of moments like this, where the world felt safe and full of wonder. By the time they returned to the edge of Green Hill, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement. Anthony's footsteps quickened in anticipation of a warm drink at home and the quiet comfort of his familiar surroundings. In a way, he felt this walk had marked a subtle turning point. He and Titan had ventured beyond the routine, exploring not just the physical path through the woods, but also an emotional one. When they finally arrived at his apartment, Anthony fed Titan and settled into his armchair, gently massaging the dog's ears. "You're the best, you know that?" he murmured, smiling softly. Titan responded with a contented lean against Anthony's leg, his eyes half closed in relaxation. As dusk gave way to the gentle glow of streetlights, Anthony reflected on all that had transpired. The fear had not vanished entirely, but it no longer dominated his thoughts. Gwen's Coffee Haven remained his favorite spot in town. a reminder that community could stand united in the face of intimidation. And though Brad's presence might never be fully erased, his power had diminished to a distant silhouette. In its place rose a renewed faith in the resilience of both himself and those around him, bound together by a shared respect for dignity and safety. He closed his eyes, letting the day's lingering warmth wash over him. Titan, sensing his relaxation, curled up closer. And in that unspoken bond, Anthony found the peace he needed, trusting that whatever came next, they would face it together. As man and Boyan as companions forging a path of quiet strength in a sometimes unpredictable world. As we close this chapter, it's clear that what began as a reckless act of cruelty ultimately highlighted the power of compassion. Anthony, finding the courage to stand tall despite his blindness, reminds us that true vision lies not in our eyes but in our spirit. And Titan, once a canine dog, remains an unwavering symbol of loyalty and protection, proving that loyalty transcends physical challenges. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came together to ensure justice and peace prevailed. Their collective voices spoke louder than any threat, demonstrating that community support and empathy can outshine fear. We'd love to know your thoughts. What stood out to you the most, and how do you feel about the way this story resolved? Comment below to share your opinions and join the discussion. Together, let's celebrate acts of kindness, courage, and resilience that make our world a better place.